Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Andrei, if you don't know me, and I love fantasy and sci-fi, and I'm here to review books and give book recommendations. And today we are reviewing another book, fantasy this time, and we are reviewing The Light Fantastic by Terry Pratchett. If you're new, don't forget subscribe, like the content, and look at other videos, especially the one we're gonna talk today, since it's the second book of a series. Then go maybe watch the first video, which is The Color of Magic. But let's get to The Light Fantastic. So, if you don't know, both of these books are part of the Discworld world, and this is, to my knowledge, the only book that follows the events right after the first one. So, for example, I've read two books of the Death series, which are Mort and Reaperman, and even though we follow the same character, which is Death, the books don't follow the events one right after the other. They're two separate stories that happen to focus on the same character. That doesn't happen in these books. Even though we also follow the same characters, which in this case are Rincewind and Two Flower, we actually follow them in the events right after the first book ends. So I don't know if this happens often in the Discworld. To my knowledge, this is the only series where this happens. The Light Fantastic was published in 1986, so quite a while ago now. And if you've never heard about Terry Pratchett or about Discworld, then the only warning that I have to you is that if you're wanting to go into this world, remember this is an absurdist comedic fantasy series, and maybe these two books aren't the best ones to start with, but if you've started already, then you probably know how absurd it can be, or it can get at times, so there's not much point in me warning you about it. On Goodreads, this book has 152,000 ratings, which I mean, it's been out for a long time, so it has gathered a lot of ratings, and its score stands on a perfect 4 out of 5, which is rare, being so on the dot, but let's hope my score is better than what Goodreads thinks, and we shall see. If you're curious about these hardbacks that I have, they are from the Discworld Emporium editions, and each book of the Discworld Emporium, the hardbacks have a different color and a different design, and it's always related to the story that happens in the books, but yeah, they have a different texture from the usual hardbacks. It's almost like it's a fabric and not really paper. I don't know how well to explain it, but you can see it also has some silver details. It's really nice, I like them, and because some of these were gifted to me, I just want to have the full collection all the same as a proper bookaholic, and that's why I have these. Now, before I jump into the categories, you know the deal, I'm gonna go through the synopsis. If you don't want to hear anything about it, especially because this is the second book, so it probably contains spoilers, if you don't want to hear anything, just skip to the timestamp that will be floating around. And if you still are curious to know about the synopsis, stick around and let's go for it. It is known as the Discworld. It is a flat planet supported on the backs of 4 elephants, who in turn stand on the back of the great turtle Atun as it swims majestically through space. And it is quite possibly the funniest place in all of creation. As it moves towards a seemingly inevitable collision with a malevolent red star, the Discworld has only one possible savior. Unfortunately, this happens to be the singularly inept and cowardly wizard called Rincewind, who was last seen falling off the edge of the world. And we're back. So as you can see, there's not much details about the book itself. You know some premises, you know some details about the previous book, but that is it. And now before we jump into the categories, just the score I gave to the first book, so you can have an idea about where I stand. Because the first book of the series, I actually didn't enjoy it that much compared with other Terry Pratchett books. I mean, it still has a great score, 3.8 is quite high, but yeah, the writing style wasn't the same for me as compared with the Death series, and the characters themselves were just okay. They were on the limbo between the 4 and the 3 constantly, so yeah, it was a mixed feeling for The Color of Magic. But now let's move on to the categories of The Light Fantastic, starting with plot. As I mentioned before, this is the first book of the Discworld where we follow the events right after the previous book, which has never happened in all the books I read on Terry Pratchett's novels, and so because of that it got me a bit more interested, even though I hadn't found the first book that interesting. My curiosity was spiked because of it, let's say. And that's also partially because the first book had left some questions open, there were some plot details that hadn't been tied off yet, so I knew that they were going to be eventually answered, and I just wanted to see how those would happen. Of course, for this plot, we have a lot of twisty plot twists in the Pratchett style, which means that in a normal fantasy book, we would consider these plot armor or just very convenient details, but in this absurdist fashion of Terry Pratchett, it kind of lines up perfectly and it fits well, and you understand why these things are happening, even if they seem very random. But yeah, they line up well in Terry Pratchett's writing style. The only small criticism that I have to say is that there were some points where I feel like we were all over the shop, and I hope you get that reference if you've read this book. But we were, in the sense, a bit too scattered with too many things happening, and there wasn't much time to breathe and completely understand all these things. That's just a small criticism amongst all the positives. So for this category, I'm gonna give a 4 out of 5. But also, I just want to reference that the ending I thought was quite good. I mean, better than the first one, but the first one it ended very open-endedly. Whereas this one, it had a good conclusion, everything was tied off well, so it makes sense for me to like this one more. As for characters, we continue following Rincewind and Twoflower, our wizard and tourist from Discworld. And whereas in the first book, I found them funny, but a bit stereotypical at times, I think in this book, I was able to fully connect with them and find them funny and endearing as they are. Even when I would realize some new detail about these characters that somehow I felt like I should know this before, but I didn't know about it, it would make me chuckle and it would make me laugh instead of just being pulled out of the story, which would happen in other cases. And I think that's because not only of Terry Pratchett's writing style, but also the interactions between these two main characters and the world around them and the other characters in this world. I think this book, in terms of the characters, approximated itself a bit more with the more recent Discworld novels, such as the Death series, and that's why I started enjoying the reading experience a bit more. And so for this category, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. Moving on to world building, this book is probably one of the ones in the Discworld where we get to explore a huge part of the Discworld. But at the same time, we get thrown a lot of new things left, right, and center. But at the same time, we see some of the oldest parts of the Discworld, such as Atuan, and we see how all of these things work and why they make a lot of sense, and why what you think might be just absurd might also have a small explanation that makes it make sense in the world. I think Terry Pratchett is able to blend very well, creating a familiar world and building upon it, and at the same time adding these new extravagant things that just make you be like, what the hell is happening? I like it, but it's weird, but it makes me question all this, but at the same time I'm fully into it. And of course, being able to see other characters from future series such as that creates a different type of connection, because it gives us that feeling, just like with Brandon Sanderson and the Cosmere, when we start seeing characters from other series appearing in the series that we're currently reading. It gives us this feeling that we know something that the other characters don't. And that's just a feeling you don't get often. But I won't speak much more about that because I don't want to spoil the book, but I'll just say that this category for me was a 5 out of 5. Now on to writing style. You can guess already that I felt an improvement from The Color of Magic to The Light Fantastic, and I feel like the writing became less extravagant in the absurdism and more logical in the absurdism, if that makes sense, which I don't really think it does, but in my brain it does, so let's go with that. And of course, having more context about the characters and the plot, even the situation in which the world was built, helped me connect more with this reading. Knowing that Terry Pratchett wrote these books almost as a parody to other fantasy series or fantasy tropes helped me pinpoint when those were happening, and I could actually enjoy them more, instead of just thinking that this was just random and a bit absurd. It was almost like finally I could understand the inside jokes that Terry Pratchett had written in the book, and I wasn't just feeling excluded by not understanding why a certain part was funny. And I think that if I reread the first book, The Color of Magic, I would probably understand better these references, and I think this category would probably increase a bit compared to my first reading of this book. But for this book in specific, for The Light Fantastic, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. And finally, my enjoyment. I think you can also guess that my enjoyment was slightly higher than the first book. I was more connected to everything, to the plot, to the characters, to the world, and because of that I was able to enjoy it more. Was it one of those books that I just have to keep reading and I cannot stop, I just read it all the time? At times, yes, there were times where I was having so much fun that I just wanted to keep reading, but I can't say that was happening all the time. I would say it was a peaceful and fun journey that I had with Rincewind and To Flower. And therefore, for me, this category is a 4 out of 5. And so we finished with all our categories. Let me just put both books categories here. So as you can see, the Light Fantastic, the second book, got a 4 for plot, then a 5 for character and world building, and then 4 for writing style and enjoyment. And this gives us a final score of 4.4 out of 5. So it definitely had a big increase from the first to the second book, although I reckon that if I reread the first book, it would probably get to a 4 at least, because I would understand it better and I would have a different appreciation for it. But this is what we get. And I mean, 4.4 for The Light Fantastic is great, considering that on Goodreads it only has a score of 4. I think I enjoyed it a lot more than the average people, so you might too. Let me know. I think this just shows that the experiences a person goes through really changes their opinions on books. So no one has the same opinion, and that's why I want to hear from you. So let me know, have you read this book? If you have, comment down below, what did you give this book? And if not, tell me if you're gonna read it or not. And that's it. If you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon, either on Thursdays or Sundays, okay? Alright, adeus.